about to start this afternoon's session. The focus, as you all know, is on the new Scramble for Africa. And we have two speakers. To my left, Jeremy Corbyn MP, and to my right, Expo Nani Kofi, who's the director of the Colombo Centre for Citizens' Rights and Conflict Resolution, which is based in Peki, Volta region, Ghana, but has networks and links right across the world. And my name is Amapoku, and I am also a member of the Colombo Network. So, because we only have an hour, I'll go straight into having the two speakers. Jeremy will speak first, followed by Expo. Then the floor will be open for you to make your contributions and ask your questions. And just to say, I would like you to try and keep contributions brief and concise so that we can encourage and have as many people from the floor speaking as possible. So if we could all give a hand to Jeremy, who's going to start off by speaking first.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to our workshop this afternoon. And I'm really pleased that in Stop War Coalition we're having this session on Africa and a discussion about the new Scramble for Africa, and an organisation that I chair called Liberation is making this the theme of our annual meeting on January the 14th next year, which is going to again be the whole theme of the European Scramble for Africa. We just had a session downstairs on imperialism, and we were discussing then the brutal history of British imperialism all over the world, but we particularly drew attention to the situation in Kenya, where the Mau Mau people who were murdered in their thousands by the British during the colonial wars of the 1950s, those that have survived have sought legal redress, and I've been working with them, and it was quite a poignant moment in the High Court in the summer when we finally reached a situation where the British government was at least being brought to account in court for what had gone on. And then later on there was a very lengthy statement in Parliament by the Foreign Secretary in which he managed to say the settlement with the Mau Mau people did not constitute an apology or form a precedent for any future legal actions that might be taken, but instead they were going to give £25 million to those that had suffered losses during the colonial wars. This, frankly, is the tip of an iceberg that applies all over the globe, where British soldiers behaved in the most appalling way in Malaya and many, many other places. And I really do take my hat off to those Mau Mau families that have fought for so long to get to this point where at least their cause is being recognised. Because looking around this hall, I can see people of very similar age to myself who were probably all brought up on the same narrative in the 1950s that somehow or other the Mau Mau were some massive great evil force that was about to invade this country and kill us all in our beds, and it was only British soldiers' brave actions in running concentration camps in Kenya that was going to save us from this fate. And the more one looks into the history of this, and the brave work done by a small number of Labour MPs in Parliament at that time, particularly Tony Benn, and Tony Benn even then in the 1950s, and one or two others, particularly Fenner Brockway, in exposing this, eventually helped to bring this situation about. And so, without wanting to repeat what was done in the last session, I do urge you all to take part in all the debates and discussions next year and later the remains of this year on the commemoration of the centenary of the start of the First World War, and look at the effects of that war, both on the African people that died fighting in the Allied forces, and the way in which colonial masters were changed at the end of the First World War. For example, what is now Tanzania stopped being German East Africa and became British East Africa, ultimately to become independent. There's a whole lesson there to be learnt. There's also another lesson to be learnt, and that is going back a little bit further. And again, we raised the question of the quality of history teaching in our schools. I during all my time in school, and I was actually passionately interested in history in school, even did it for A-level, had never heard of the 1884 Congress of Berlin. I learnt about that later on. I managed to get the House of Commons library to find me the proceedings of the 1884 Congress of Berlin, and they're extremely interesting. This was where the European powers, with the US in observer status, sat round a table in Berlin and essentially carved up Africa between themselves. This was during what was called the Scramble for Africa in the latter part of the 19th century, and King Leopold got control of what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he didn't even give it to Belgium. He said it's his personal territory, and it was the Belgian state then, in an act of enormous generosity in 1908, nationalised the Congo for itself, and the same slavery and everything else continued. So the history of Africa, of slavery, of exploitation, of partition, of division, of colonial wars, is something that needs to be better explained and more fully understood. And the massive contribution made to the wealth of the Western European companies particularly, but to some extent the United States, from African exploitation going back 300, 400, 500 years is on a par with the wealth made in the City of London from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean. And so when we talk about the movement for reparations, I think it's a serious issue and a serious movement. The wealth that was sucked out of Africa has never been put back. But it would be nice to think that the current situation in Africa and the African relations with the rest of the world were on a wholly different path. Sadly, they are not. Sadly, the minerals that have been exploited from Africa and still exploited from Africa, mainly by European and American companies, but increasingly by Chinese companies as well, are also dramatically underpriced where the African people are concerned, and dramatically overpriced when the products finally hit the markets for Western consumers. Where do the profits go? Sucked away into tax havens all around the world. Why is the world's biggest mining company based in Switzerland, a country where there's almost no mining whatsoever, any more than Belgium is one of the main manufacturers of chocolate in a country that grows no cocoa last time I looked? And there are many, many other examples one can draw all over the world. So we have to have that understanding of that economic relationship. Now, moving on very quickly, because I'm conscious of the time, more recently we've had two factors coming in. One has been the idea, heavily promoted by Tony Blair and some of his colleagues, was that Africa was, to his quotes, in quotes what he said, a basket case, and he had to sort it out. He had to set up a commission for Africa. It's very nice of Tony Blair to do that, because he's a very busy man, and he's so busy in all the rest of the world, he found time to set up a commission for Africa. And his solution is what? A market-based solution, where the IMF conditions of aid and advice to each national government are: 1, privatise everything that's publicly owned; 2, sell off your land to big business multinational corporations, Monsanto, etc., to buy up the often very, very fertile land and invest in it; thirdly, export food from Africa to Western Europe, United States, and to some extent, or perhaps increasingly so, to China and Japan. Never mind that African children thrown off their land are starving as a result of this process. Never mind that we can buy early season vegetables air freighted in while people starve alongside it. African economic strategy is, with exceptions, but generally speaking, one of exploitation of mineral resources, sale of land and farming resources to feed the rest of the world, and the infrastructure is very much designed towards removal of primary products and raw materials away from Africa to the coast in order to be exploited elsewhere. That exploitation leads one into wars. Why were the French so interested in Mali? Why are they so interested in Central African Republic? Why have they kept so many dictators in power other than to make life bearable and easy for the mineral companies to run their affairs in those countries? Why is there a civil war going on in the Congo? Why are certain militia groups funded by mineral companies? I think you all know the answers as well as I do. We need a debate, we need a discussion, we need a greater understanding of this before we're conned into yet another bombardment of Libya, yet another bombardment of Mali, yet another military activity somewhere in that continent. And I'm really pleased, and I'll conclude with this thought, that Expo is joining us today on the platform. It's very good that he's here because he's had lots of personal problems, and I'm really pleased he's come. Expo and I go back a very long way to the founding of the Campaign for Non-Alignment in 1986, and he's a great friend of mine, and I'm a great admirer of his works and what he does. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, all of you. First of all, I want to say that bear with me that I'm not in the best of states of mind, and that if my presentation seems to be a bit problematic, you just bear with me. Just before I arrived here, my younger brother died. A day after I arrived here, my father died. So I'll have to rush back to organize the burial of both of them. So if I'm a bit disorganized, you just understand that it's the state in which I find myself. We are looking today at the new scramble for Africa. And the situation in Africa, a lot of time people talk about how we have failed states, how we have corruption and other things. What is not done is to explain how come we have this situation which is being referred to as a stage of failure, stage of corruption and all that. I will start from the bottom of the speech, which will be what we do. In fact, the Stop the War has a campaign on the Scramble for Africa. I think that, and I've seen that, not much attention is paid by people in organizing around that particular campaign, although it is one of the Stop the War campaigns on the website and it's well publicized. I would ask all of you that when we leave this meeting and you go to your communities, you go to your campus,